Love really is a pretty simple equation in the animal kingdom. They seem to intuitively grasp that 1 + 1 = 2. Unfortunately, something weird happens when it changes from 1 + 1 to boy meets girl, and the equation is a little more difficult to solve, especially here at BYU, when there's a whole bunch of other variables that come into play, and make it a lot more difficult to make things happen. When we don't end up with relationships, we end up with something that looks a little more like this. Now, as I've talked to people about the BYU dating scene, I think we can all agree we don't have to be dating experts to understand that it's a little messed up. There's a lot of negative feelings about dating, and things that I hear over and over. Women are crazy, men are pigs, I'm so sick of first dates. If I get told to go on one more date, I'm going to explode, I feel like an old maid. You hear all sorts of this stuff. But despite the negativity, what's interesting is every single one of us still wants to date. We are emotionally, physically, hormonally hardwired to make this process happen. So what's stopping us? That's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about what's stopping us, why the current system is doing more harm than good, and what we can do to fix it. But first, let's understand why we are naturally hardwired to date. You see, there was a psychologist named Abraham Maslow that discovered in the 1960s that every single person has the physiological needs to interact with the opposite gender, to love and be loved, and to be part of something bigger than themselves. Can we get a better explanation of like meeting someone, dating, and then eventually becoming like married and starting a family with each other? No. Well, if Maslow is right, then what's stopping us? Another psychologist named Ryan Deci discovered the answer. There are 3 critical attributes that we must have in our lives. They are autonomy. I do what I want. Competence. I'm good at what I do. And relatedness. People like me. If we have these 3 things in our lives, everything works together perfectly. But if one of them is missing, then we will not do the things that we want to do. So, obviously, one of those 3 things is missing from the dating scene. So what is it? I think it's best described by something that one of my friends told me. He said, there's 15,000 girls on this campus, and I feel like I cannot get one of them to fall in love with me. I know girls feel this way too. So the problem is that we as a collective group feel lonely, and that loneliness leads to a lack of relatedness. And when we don't have that relatedness, we will not do what we want to do. When we feel like nobody likes me, we're not going to get out there and date. Now, the way we're trying to fix this problem is flawed. You see, well-meaning people understand that we're crazy to think that there's nobody out there for us, and that if we just go out there and start to date, that we will eventually discover that there is someone out there for us. The problem is that they do it all wrong. They engage in something that I call finger shaking. You see authority figures, whether they are parents, professors, people that are already married, Paul, they shake their fingers at us and they say, it is your job to date. It is your duty to date. You need to start putting yourself out there or you're never going to get married. And what happens when you get all this finger shaking? Well, all of a sudden it feels like you are no longer the one who wants to date, and that it's other people who want you to date. And so all of a sudden this natural feeling goes away, that feeling of autonomy goes away, and we think, I don't want to, I have to. And when we feel like we have to, we no longer want to. Now, that's not the only bad thing. You see, when people start shaking their fingers at us, we start to think dating's only purpose is marriage. Okay, here's the problem with that, is that if dating's only purpose is marriage, then every time that it doesn't lead to that, we feel like a failure. Another problem with this, if dating's only purpose is marriage, we start to have first dates that look a little something like this. I call them the interview dates. You sit down across from each other and you pepper each other with questions, trying to feel out if that person is your eternal companion, all while sizing up how they look in a tuxedo or a white dress. I know you guys have seen this. Just walk by the Cougar Meet. It happens every single day. And what happens if you don't get past an interview date? You feel like you failed the interview. And when you feel like you failed the interview, it feels like you are no longer competent. You have this thought that I am bad at dating, and when you feel bad at dating, you will not date. Now, we have created a system that in trying to fix relatedness is taking away autonomy and confidence. That's not the worst thing. The worst thing is not when we fail, it's when we succeed. You see, because when we succeed, there's this huge implied commitment that all of a sudden, if I ask someone on a second date, I might as well be getting down on one knee. and asking for their hand in marriage. And the problem with that is that if you get to a second date but not a third date, it feels like you have to break up. Now, breakups aren't necessarily bad. The bad thing about breakups is that we only like to tell about the bad ones. Nobody wants to hear about the people who civilly part ways. We want the juicy stuff, and it's the juicy stuff that we're going to get. For example, I went on dates last semester. One example, I went with a girl, we went on a couple dates, we're still great friends afterwards. It didn't work out and things are just fine. I went on another date with a girl, we went on a couple dates, things were fine, and instead I became the subject of a 45-minute Relief Society lesson. Now, which one of those stories am I more likely to tell? I'm telling the Relief Society lesson. Because we as people like to do something called catastrophize. We like to make the stories in our lives more extreme than they really are. And what happens when we catastrophize is that these stories start to swirl around and we think to ourselves, if I ever date someone, I need to make sure that there's an escape hatch nearby, because when we break up, it's going to get ugly. Now, the problem with the escape hatch mentality is this, is that they've done studies that say that 50% of people who are married live within 2 minutes of each other. For BYU students, that means the people who are in your classes, your ward, your friends, none of those people have escape hatches nearby. And so with these two differing ideas of I will fall in love with those who are close to me and the people who are close to me do not have escape hatches, we will experience something that psychologists call cognitive dissonance. That is when, if you have these two differing ideas, we will lie to ourselves. And instead of saying and recognizing that the girls and guys in our wards and classes are good people, we will monstratize them. We will turn them into these crazy people. We will think that the men are pigs, the women are nuts, and that we cannot get anywhere close to them. And what happens is we start to believe this. And when we start to believe that, we date people we don't know. And what does a date look like when you date someone you don't really know? Somebody save us from ourselves. We have entered into something that I call the death spiral of dating, and we will go around and around and around feeling worse about ourselves. And the situation will never be fixed. Now, the good news is that because it is a cycle, if we can break it, we can fix the dating here at BYU. As I've looked at this system, there's 3 weak spots that we can do things to fix it. And actually, it's not even that we have to do things, we just have to stop doing a few things. First spot, the interview date. We need to get rid of the interview date, okay? The less talking there is, the better. I know that seems counterintuitive, but just learn to go have fun with each other. Just go have fun. Enjoy yourself. Have a good time. Here's another reason why that's important, is because nobody comes back from a date and they go, we went to jump on it and then we had ice cream and I think we're getting married. It lowers this level of commitment and it makes it feel like a second date wouldn't be that big of a deal. Second place, so glad you brought this up, is this process right here. It's the process of moving down the road and determining where you stand in your relationship. We need to ditch the DTR. No one in their right mind, especially in the first 7 days, should ever have a DTR. Are we really so excited to update our Facebook status that we must know where we stand with this other person? We need to remember that they're people. Ditch the DTR. And the last spot that I have found is right here with the catastrophes. We need to ditch the drama. It's possible for people to part ways peacefully. We don't need to tell these terrible stories about the other person when we part ways. We can still be civil with each other. It's easy to just say, they just weren't my type, but we're still friends. We can do those 3 things, then we can fix the dating scene. Just remember, ditch the interview date, ditch the DTR, and ditch the drama. You see, we're all trying to get to the same place anyways. We might as well make the path a little more enjoyable.